Hey, this is John. Let's Talk Native is now on Patreon. You can support the show by going to patreon.com/Let's Talk Native. We will be producing exclusive content for our Patreon supporters. Thanks for checking us out.
Let's Talk Native is produced at the LTN Studios on the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. We break all the rules for Native media by peeling back the layers of assimilation and indoctrination. No prayers, no buffalo speeches, and no spirituality shows. While this podcast does not provide a path to spiritual enlightenment, we do take a tough look at history, oppression, and our survival. But the real goal here is to bring our people together by breaking down what separates us. So, welcome to Let's Talk Native with John Kane.
So I'm John Kane. Hey, thanks for joining us tonight. It is Giving Tuesday. So let me start off by reminding people that, look, we are not a big commercial enterprise here. So I do encourage people to support the program in any way that you can. We are on Patreon, so you can go to patreon.com/Let's Talk Native. You can go to our website, which is letstalknative.com. But I also want to remind people that I do shows on WPFW in Washington, D.C. and on WBAI in New York City. So by all means, support listener-supported radio. And you can go to give2wbai.org, or you can go to WPFWFM.org and make donations to these listener-supported radio stations that happen to give me some time on their airwaves. So I just wanted to mention that, get it out of the way. And you know what? I'll tell you what. While I'm offering my appreciations, I gotta say, NewYorkTimes.com ran a piece about Native voices in the media, and Michael Kicking Bear from who's Pequot, who has his own podcast, which is, I think it's called Native Opinion. I was a guest on his show before. He recommended our podcast on this NewYorkTimes.com website, and it got spread pretty widely. So I appreciate that. He also mentioned my good friend Gauntanette Horn and her daughter, who do a podcast together. I got to give thanks to Michael Kicking Bear. I also want to mention and give thanks to Charles Cater, who is a longtime friend of mine, and we've worked together quite a bit up in Akwesasne, and we've done some other media things together. I want to give him thanks for not only making me aware of this NewYorkTimes.com piece, but also he helps get my name out there. I recently did a piece on North Country Public Radio with David Summerstein, and I also did a piece on WAMC as it related to my work back at my old high school village, trying to get them to change the mascot. So we've kind of gotten ourselves involved in some of the other media outlets. Very much supporting and promoting what we're doing here. And, look, I'm not trying to become a media or viral sensation. It's always great to have more listeners and more viewers to our videos. So I encourage people to share the programs. And I know that I'm talking about things that you may not be hearing other places. I mean, it's really important that people understand the work that we do here. And by we, I mean Jake Proud and myself. I also got, since I'm doing this, I also want to give my thanks out to Jake, because the last show that I did, I talked about cancel culture. And I was all prepared to come in here and condemn this whole notion of cancel culture. And luckily, having somebody significantly younger than me who can explain what's really happening in the social world beyond my age group, Jake kind of gave me a little bit of a lesson on what cancel culture really is. And that's why my show took the completely different turn. Well, not a different turn, but my position on that phrase and what it really means changed, because I had to spend a great deal of time explaining that I support cancel culture, because cancel culture isn't the canceling of culture. It's the whole idea of creating a culture by which you live, that you live by, that allows you to cancel the things that don't represent truth and don't represent real history, or don't represent what your agendas are. I mean, and so whether it's about canceling a human being that you find out is a bit of a jerk or a scumbag and you don't want to be associated with them, that's fine. Or whether it's, calling for the removal of a statue or or a monument, that is not canceling culture. That is developing a culture of truth and a culture of change, and a culture that allows you to speak up and have your voice heard as you're correcting the false narratives of history. So, I have a much better sense of what that expression means, and now I mean, if I'm going to use that, I'm going to use that expression as a positive thing. Just like the idea of political correctness, when people turn that into a negative, it just doesn't make any sense to me. Because what's wrong with making something not just politically correct, but socially and morally correct? So, sometimes getting schooled a little bit on some of this phraseology as it is, is being spread across, the American vernacular, even as it gets grossly reinterpreted or manipulated by the right or whomever. I got to give value to younger people, including Jake, who helps do the show each week. So, all right. On that note, regarding cancel culture and the difference or what is really a representation of erasing history, I've got to talk about the anniversary of the Sand Creek Massacre. And I'm not going to get into the gory details of it, because it is pretty upsetting. But the part that disturbs me most, even as I see other Native media outlets putting up information about the Sand Creek Massacre, and to I guess to recall, on November 29th in 1864 is when the Cheyenne and Arapaho were attacked by Colonel Shivington, who happened to be a Methodist minister of all things. And it is really one of the most disgusting and bloodiest massacres that ever took place, in this kind of short period of time, this kind of bloodbath. Men, women, and children, they were not just killed, they were mutilated. They had body parts taken from them, including genitalia, so they could be kept as souvenirs. Children were shot as target practice. And this is all documented not by Native accounts, but by the white people who were there, including some soldiers, but also some reporters. But the thing that disturbs me most about it is the way history is manipulated. Even though you can learn about the Sand Creek Massacre, when you look it up online or you see any of the accounts, there is no connection to this heinous act and who sat in the White House at the time. Abraham Lincoln. I mean, again, 1864. How is it that Abraham Lincoln gets to be this Teflon man that none of this stuff seems to come back to him? I mean, this is the guy who was responsible not only for the largest mass execution in the history of the United States, with the Dakota 38 and the two that would the plus two that would be executed later on. Not only would he be responsible for that, but this massacre and the legislation that his administration pushed forward, including the Homestead Act, which led to many of these conflicts, that's all on Abraham Lincoln. And yet, just as, again, having my grandson in studio talking about what they're taught about these heroic figures in American history, nobody ever associates any of this stuff to any of those guys. So it's like these massacres existed in a vacuum. Look, Colonel Shivington can be blamed for much, absolutely, but he was never held accountable. He was never even court-martialed. I mean, his military career didn't exactly flower after that. But when you got famed Indian killers like Kit Carson condemning what took place there, that's you know it had to be pretty bad. So again, revisiting this whole notion of what is really erasure. If you can mention even a terrible event and bring it up, as an anniversary or whatever else, but still not connect it to the rest of what was happening in history, there's no context then. And trust me, there should be context. There should be context in the fact that this was Abraham Lincoln. Because, look, I remember seeing a poll a few years ago, and this was a global poll. And Abraham Lincoln, I think, was actually, and I don't think they were including like Jesus Christ or or any characters like that. But I think Abraham Lincoln came out on top. I mean, I think globally he was considered one of the most popular historical figures in the world. And of course, if you erase all the negative stuff and you just prop up these individuals for only the good things you can attribute to them falsely or whether it's true or not, I guess, then sure you can put a nice spit shine on anybody. If you take away all of the, all of the bad character, if you take away all of the blemishes on these people, I mean, to be clear, there's a reason that he was assassinated. I'm not saying it was just. I'm not saying that assassination was just. But to be clear, he pissed off a lot of people, enough so that it cost him his life. Now the other thing that since I'm on this Abraham Lincoln kick, the other thing that drives me crazy is when I see these Confederate flags all over the place. The Confederate flags are not just about slavery and the Civil War. I mean, you have to understand, the Confederate South, they were reveling in the assassination of the President of the United States. So I don't want to just, when I see that Confederate flag out there, I'm not just going to connect it to pro-slavery states. I'm going to connect it to the pro-assassination states. I mean, and the crazy part is, on one hand, the Republicans want to take credit for Abraham Lincoln because at that time, things changed between what the parties represented, but he was considered a Republican. And so when I see these flags that are brandished around, with these Confederate flags, I'm thinking, that flag represents the South that applauded the assassination of a sitting Republican president. So I'm just saying, just to put it out there, because again, things are never put into proper context. I'm not, going to suggest here that in 1865 that the Republican Party was the party of virtue versus the other parties. I'm not going to go there exactly. But I'm also not going to suggest that, the Republicans were so concerned about racism that they were anti-slavery in the 1860s. No, that's not exactly true either. Again, history is not put into its proper context. So I think it's really important that we talk about this stuff and we frame it with the rest of what was happening in history. Look, we get into a conversation about where did all those soldiers go after the Civil War? Well, I'll tell you where they went. They went on to killing Native people. And in fact, even the idea of propping up black soldiers and creating the Buffalo Soldiers as black U.S. Union soldiers that would facilitate the killing of Native people. This is part of that ugly history. And you can't. I mean, you can't praise. I mean, most people don't even get the whole Bob Marley Buffalo Soldier song. They don't even get it because they don't care enough about history to understand what all of this stuff is all about. So I'm part of what I'm talking about today is kind of backing up a little bit what I've talked about over the last couple of shows. Like I said, I don't know how we say we're all in this together if many of us that are the marginalized people are going to have the histories erased. You can't say that we're all in this together. I mean, you can't expect me to praise the George Washingtons, the Thomas Jeffersons, and the Abraham Lincolns, or the Teddy Roosevelts, all those those defaced faces on the or faces that deface, I should say, the Black Hills. No, you can't expect me to. And don't just make this about anti-American, or that somehow I'm racially biased because I hate white people. No, it's not about that. But let's let some of these people in history own their history and own their own actions. I mean, it's real easy for people to single out, the evildoers, as as George W. Bush used to say. I mean, but the reality is, the reason we call the president of the United States Ronaldagayas is because they've all played a part in this genocide that is over 500 years old. They all do. And it includes Barack Obama. It includes, every single one of them. And it doesn't matter, even with this administration, it doesn't matter how many women, how many people of color, that Biden puts into his cabinet. It won't be enough to change the arc of white supremacy that exists in the United States. And it's a shame. I'm not saying we shouldn't work for it, and I'm not saying we shouldn't work towards correction. And I'm not even suggesting that there aren't going to be some positive steps during in a Biden administration. I'm not saying there is either. I think that the jury will be out for quite some time. You can't judge history until it's well in the rearview mirror. But I'll tell you, if you judge the history of any of these presidents, any of them, all 45 so far and 46 to come, when you look back and you look at what their track records were and what they accomplished, and not just what they accomplished for good, but what they continued to do as far as what's wrong. And that's why this whole idea of hearing the voices that are not being heard is so important. Look, I'm glad to get some good plugs on some of the more mainstream media, and it'd be nice if they would reach out a little bit more on some of these stories, and it doesn't have to be the same native voices that they always prop up. And I'm not condemning some of the voices that are out there, although some of them I think are questionable. But you want to reach out and you want to find out what's happening to Native people on Native territories, or how Native people, like my good friend Regan DeLoggins, how Native people are getting through life in an urban environment, or in an environment that is separate from their home or their homelands or their families. I mean, we've been through this before. A lot of times it was forced upon us. Now, some of us do make choices because there are such limited opportunities on our territories for, and I don't mean just for careers in terms of money and salary and that kind of stuff, but it's very hard to have a meaningful impact in your own territories. Look, let's be clear. Some Native territories are so completely assimilated, at least in some regard. I mean, what I hear, the Choctaw Nation declaring themselves a Christian nation. I mean, when you start hearing language like that, and look, and I'm not condemning Christians per se, but the idea that that even with a country that surrounds the Choctaw Nation, like the United States, that claims to have a separation of church and state, even if they really don't. But even if they claim, excuse me, even if they claim to, it is bizarre to hear the Choctaw Nation. And they're not the only ones. I mean, look, I've heard some crazy statements come out of so-called leadership in some of these Native territories, about our ward custodian relationship to the United States, like they are our custodians, like we're wards of the state. I've heard white people say it, but I've heard Native people say it too. I've also heard people refer to our existence as like we're denying reality. And, it's like I said on one of those radio interviews. I don't care how big and powerful the United States is. It doesn't give them the right or the power or the authority to declare that I am no longer a Ganyagahaga or Ongwe. They can say it all they want about how they've declared that I'm a U.S. citizen. But if I haven't made that declaration, then it simply doesn't exist. It's not true. And yet I've heard Native people, including Native leadership, suggest, well, they made us U.S. citizens in 1924. Well, no, they didn't. They may have made that declaration, but if somebody says something, it doesn't necessarily make it true. If that were the case, then Donald Trump would be reelected. I mean, because it's just a question of somebody declaring something that's not true. Look, I understand the world we live in. Even as a part of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, there's a sense that the colonial powers that surround our existence today, they have to let us participate in their systems because of what they perceive and what the world perceives as what is socially just. But even if the United States or Canada says that we can vote in their elections, doesn't mean that we have to, and it doesn't mean that we should. Granted, considering what they've done to us as people and as our territories, and what they have done historically to our people, ranging from massacres like the Sand Creek Massacre to residential schools to basically creating policy that forces us into poverty, all of that stuff. Yeah, we could argue that that they can't deny us access to their system, but I still go back to the Turo. We still have choices. Yeah, there are some choices that were made before we were born. The fact that many of us speak English, for instance, and there are some choices that we only have a limited range of choice. How we live, how we conduct commerce, how we sustain ourselves in terms of employment and that kind of thing. Look, we still can make some dramatic changes to the way things are, but we are living with a certain amount of cards that were dealt to us. But we don't have to succumb to everything that they claim we are. We don't have to allow other people to define who we are. And by that, I'm saying we don't have to accept this idea that we've been stripped of our culture, that we've been stripped of our nationality, if you will, or our national character. We don't have to accept that. And in fact, I would argue that we have made huge strides in my lifetime to regain and reclaim some of what had been lost by previous generations. And I'm not condemning the previous generations, not specifically. Now, I think generations before us had to make tough choices. And some of the choices they made were wrong. I mean, I will never agree with my parents' generation that made the decision not to teach us the language. And that was you can actually see on a timeline when it happens, when the language drops off considerably. Because my father's generation, my aunts, uncles, they all spoke the language fluently. I know in some territories you got to go back more than just one generation. But regardless, you had a generational decision that was made. I mean, and I don't think they all got together and said, here's what we're going to do, or here's what we're not going to do. We're not going to teach our kids to speak our native tongue anymore. But it became a fairly universal decision, and it was a wrong decision. I understand what they viewed as some of the pressures, and they thought that they couldn't see the value anymore in it, and it's one of those things that you don't see the value until it's gone. Then once it's gone, you realize, wait a minute, we're not just losing the ability to speak a different way. There's a whole philosophy tied to language. And when I think about native languages not being so noun based, like many of the European languages were, Latin-based, Anglican, whatever languages were. You can demonstrate almost a different philosophy on how you communicate. So, I mean, again, and I don't want to keep belaboring that one point, but it is one of those decisions that previous generations made that I will never quite fully understand that decision and how the rationale was justified. But I will say, in spite of that, like with so many other things that we've lost culturally over many generations, there's always been enough that was hung on to for us to grab it back and pull it back. Our language is resurging. We've got programs that are helping our kids learn the language. We're learning more and more about our history that the ones who would have handed it down from generation to generation were removed from. They were killed. They were removed from the lands. But we're still finding bits and pieces. Sometimes they're locked in the language. Sometimes we find just some old writings, or we still have enough people who are in their 80s, 90s, or even over 100 that can shed a little bit of light on something that we basically thought we lost. So we do have the ability to bring some of this stuff back. And I couldn't be prouder of the fact that we are living at a time of that resurgence of our culture and our language. But the more that we learn about things, the more we realize what has been wiped out, what has been erased, which kind of gets me to my original point in the first place. I think we do have to. We can't hold Abraham Lincoln accountable for something. The guy's been dead for a long time. But we can hold those who want to keep retelling the history over. We can hold them accountable. Say, look, let's not paint him as the hero that you're painting him as. Look, he was a president. I get it. And we understand the whole Civil War thing, Emancipation Proclamation, but let's not leave out the Sand Creek Massacre. Let's not leave out the largest mass execution in the history of the United States. Because if you leave those things out of his resume, then you're telling a false history. Bottom line, you're just telling a false history. So that's why I say I support cancel culture, because I want to cancel the false narratives. I want to cancel the lies, and I want to cancel the liars. So anyway, kind of a bit of a throwback to the last show. So, all right. Hey, we're at the bottom of the hour. We'll take a break and we'll come right back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. So everyone, thanks for coming back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Look, we're in the last month of 2020, and that doesn't mean that after New Year's Eve that somehow this terrible year is done and everything's roses again. No, that's not the case. But we always do look at the new year as an opportunity to do some things, new. To make some commitments to the future and that kind of thing. We're gonna do a little bit of some changing up after the new year. No, we're not losing anything, so don't anybody be concerned. But we'll probably do maybe perhaps a little format change. But as we close out this year, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention obviously what has marked this year and made this year somewhat incredible, which is obviously the global pandemic, COVID-19. I hope people, as they as the holiday season for many people who celebrate these kinds of things, that people are responsible. And we won't know for probably till next week or the week after how much the Thanksgiving holiday was impacted. Right now, the numbers are all over the place because reporting over a long holiday weekend is inaccurate. But I think there's going to be some ugly numbers that come in because some of the numbers that weren't reported properly necessarily are going to be lumped in. Some of these sites, they spread them back out, but I think the numbers are going to be ugly. I think the results of people getting together at an unusual level, considering what's happening. Not just the people out there who are just belligerent about wearing masks or about social gatherings, but I know there's probably a lot of people who think, well, no, it's just family and everybody's being careful and that kind of stuff. The reality is we can't know what people we aren't spending 24 hours a day with, who they're coming into contact with. And if you're going to have gatherings of 10 people or more in your home or in the home of a family member, you've created a risky scenario. And there may be a lot of that, over this next month, and into the new year, because that's what people do. And I get it. And for people to disrupt their normal way of living life, especially through the winter, I know that can be difficult for people. So all I do is I can hope people are responsible and that they're careful, and hopefully we all get through this. The one thing I say, as people are saying, well, we're all in this together. Well, we all are exposed to this. Unfortunately, there is disproportionate effects that have been felt by Native people of color, not only because our health care is sometimes more challenging, our poverty levels are higher. All of the things that could contribute to good health don't necessarily exist for people who are on the lower end of the economic scale or the social justice scale, for that matter. So even with COVID, we aren't all in this together. We're all facing this thing, but we're facing it at different levels, and that's just a reality. So again, we're in the last month of the year. I hope people are wise on how they live their lives as they finish up 2020, and hopefully some things will, whether wherever you stand on vaccines or on personal behavior, personal protective equipment, hopefully we can become a little wiser as we go forward, and not try to politicize everything about our lives. But we'll see. All right, hey, one of the things that I gotta say, and I say this in an upbeat manner after that bit of a downer. As I was saying, I'm encouraged that we have been able to have a bit of a resurgency in our culture, and among the things that we become aware of is, as we're re-examining and redefining what has taken place historically, we know what the injustices are. So oftentimes we're more equipped to fight back. So we fight back against land disposition. We fight back against the rights that we know that we have. And among the calls that are out there today that are is really gaining traction is land back. And not only has it become a bit of a hallmark to what's happening in Six Nations with 1492 Land Back Lane, the folks in the Black Hills are making a stronger push for it. It's even as that looming Mount Rushmore with those defaced stone mountains overlook the people, there's a stronger and stronger sense that we need to fight to get our land back. So I'm encouraged. I mean, look, we had movements before. There was I'll Know More. There was the AIM, American Indian Movement. There was the what I would call the sovereignty movement in general that involved, the development of warrior societies and the growth of AIM during some of those, during the 70s and such. But we are becoming smarter. And I don't mean just because we've got more lawyers amongst us, because that I'm not necessarily suggesting is the best thing. But we are becoming more educated about the true history. And that is a very good thing. I see this amongst this generation of Hawaiians, for instance, the Kanaka Maoli. Look, there are so many people now that understand the miscarriage of justice. They understand the illegal occupation of the Hawaiian kingdom, the toppling of the Hawaiian kingdom by the very president who was assassinated in Buffalo here, McKinley. I mean, look, and because we learn this stuff and we get re-educated about the lies that we were told, it gives us the strength to stand up. Look, there's a solid effort amongst Hawaiians to reassert the Hawaiian kingdom. And honestly, I think they're going to have some success at some level. I mean, I know that there are people out saying, well, the United States is never going to give up Hawaii. Well, look, the world's a changing place. United States has lost its supremacy in the world. I know they still have military bases all over the freaking place, and they still have this nuclear arsenal and all that other nonsense. But as far as being this leader of the free world, I don't know. And so, as they've lost some of their standing in the international community, I think as the United States is held accountable at the international level, I think change is possible. And again, I'm not suggesting that we have some heroes in other countries that are going to solve this problem for us. But I think the audience is changing. I think this idea that everything American is wonderful is, I think that narrative is crumbling. And I'm not saying death to the United States out loud. But there are some issues here, and one election isn't going to fix it. And actually one election didn't create it. And Trump getting elected didn't create this crumbling of America. I mean, I would argue that everything that led up to Trump was a pattern. It was going this way. I mean, and I think this is what people fail to recognize when they say, "Wow, we're at a historic place, in American history, and we've never seen this and we've never seen that." Look, you guys were killing each other at unbelievable rates during the Civil War. Don't tell me that somehow the United States is more divisive than it's ever been. Give me a freaking break. And that was mostly white people killing white people. I mean, that the role that Native people or black people played in the Civil War. I mean, granted, slavery played a role, but in terms of this massive black population that swung the tide of the war, yeah, I'm not saying that black people didn't fight for their freedom. I'm not saying that. But this was mostly white people. And this was driven by money. And even as it related to slavery, it was driven by money. So, look, the United States does not have a great history. I mean, so when I hear people say, "Make America Great Again," or any of that MAGA crap, there is a lot of problems if you really examine American history. Not what's in the history books, and not the cleaned up version. I mean, true history. You're going to find that everything you thought you knew can be turned on its head. So whether you're talking about the Revolutionary War, who were the bad guys there? Oh, mean old Britain. Great Britain was the bad guys. Well, if they were such the bad guys, why did Great Britain remain being or return to being America's greatest ally? And then share a border with its with its colony, its colonization of Canada. I'm sorry. If you look at every historical event, especially the conflicts, you're going to find out that who you thought were the good guys and who you thought were the bad guys, it's all dependent on what perspective you're looking at it from. And I'm not trying to justify, Mussolini or, or Hitler or even Hirohito. Although I will say that the circumstances that create the discontent that allows a Mussolini, Hitler, Hirohito, or Trump to rise to power is sometimes a creation of a lot of infighting in general, and a lot of the effects that other countries have on the success or failure of a given state. And you only have to look at the tremendous amount of influence the United States has tried to have on places like South America, and so many South American countries. The influence they've tried to have in their Red Scare wars that went on for decades. I mean, again, keep in mind, the kids that are wrapped up in green and handed a rifle aren't the ones making the decision on to kill or be killed. It's a lot of white guys in power making those decisions, and you have to be honest in understanding that money has played a big role in all of it, in the decision to go to war, in what they're fighting for. Establishing markets, controlling oil revenue, all of this stuff. It's ugly. And it's uglier the more you look at it. But again, if you take the time, if you do the research, if you listen to other voices, you're going to find that there are perspectives that have value that you may not have considered. One of the things that I suggest, even as I even wrote a thank you to the reporter who did the piece on NewYorkTimes.com, and I said, look, I appreciate you guys mentioning Native voices and Native podcasts. I said, but you should reach out a little bit more. Our perspective is we have perspectives not just on Native issues. We have perhaps a unique way of looking at some of the conflicts that exist not only in the United States but other parts of the world. I mean, who really considers how Native people feel about Israel and Palestine? We have some pretty strong feelings about that. And in fact, there was a major to-do when the Iroquois Nationals lacrosse team went and played in Israel. There was a lot of tensions back home because of that. It caused a lot of problems, and a lot of people were really concerned about what took place. I was one of the voices on that. But even people who you might think would have been all for such a thing, we're feeling pretty indifferent about it. So it is worth noting that because we aren't as embedded in the system, we have a little bit of a unique perspective as we look at American policies, American foreign policies even, and domestic policies. We have a different view about racial equity and social justice. Yes, part of it is because we are victims of inequity and we are victims of injustice. But even as we view how other people have been treated, so whether it's black people or whether it's Muslims or whether it's immigrants coming in from South America, which I have a hard time calling them immigrants because, frankly, those borders were placed through our lands. We aren't crossing borders. Borders cross us. That's the expression, and it's true. And we see it on the northern border. We see it on the southern border. And this idea, this man-made concept of creating these national boundaries, people think that we were primitive because we weren't obsessed over lines drawn in the sand as Native people. You find out that it's more human to view things our way than the way you viewed it. You've listened to, even some of these famous battles, over taking a hill or something like that. Really? Somebody placed enough value on a hill that so many people could die as a result of egos? See, this is what part of the problem is. And if you care to hear a perspective that you've never considered before, because our perspective is based on not only our lived experience, but what we have come to know as true history. We're going to give you a different take on George Washington and John Adams and Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln and right up through. We're going to give you a different perspective, including one from as you get to the more modern eras, Kennedy and Clinton and and Obama, I mean, right up through. And it may sound like, oh, you guys just have negative stuff to say about everybody. No, but we're prepared to entertain the negative parts of everybody, along with whatever the positive things. Look, I think Barack Obama appears to have been a good father. He appears to have been a good husband. He seems like a decent human being. But it doesn't mean that I agree with the level of drone strikes that he was responsible for, or the level of deportations that he was responsible for, or the Dakota Access Pipeline that was built primarily on his watch. I can still disagree with somebody like that, and be pretty emotionally charged over that disagreement. So while you want to sing the praises of people, I'm just saying it's time that we add a little balance to some of this conversation. And if you have a balanced view of some of this stuff, or perhaps my view is skewed a little bit too much to one side because of being lied to my whole life, 60 plus years old, and having been lied to my whole life. So maybe I've swung a little bit more to one side on some of these issues. But it's still worth hearing that side because you're still just hearing that other side. So I'm saying even hold me accountable. I mean, hold me accountable. If I mention something historical and I get it wrong, I welcome somebody getting back a hold of me and say, hey, you know what? You got that wrong. Your dates are off. Such and such wasn't the president then. Or this person wasn't really responsible for that. I'm willing to have that conversation. And look, if I do get it wrong, I'll make the correction. And in fact, I'll talk about it on multiple shows because oftentimes there may be an issue that I've brought up on the show that I have repeated. Why? Because it's relevant. It's relevant to more than just one conversation. So if I have to correct that record multiple times because I got something wrong, I'm perfectly willing to do it. But in the overall scheme of things, I try to balance my opinion on world events, on U.S. events, and on Native events, based on a gathering of information, not on just one factoid or alleged fact. I try to balance it on a bunch of information. And look, we are all learning, so we're not just learning about history; we're also learning about solutions. And I think this is where we have to. I mean, this is really what's critical. Because we are facing conflicts together. I mean, like I said, we may be disproportionately affected by those conflicts. So whether it's climate change or a global pandemic, or whether it's poverty or politics, whatever the situation is, we are facing some of this stuff together, and we're going to have to come up with some solutions. And as we do come up with solutions. Look, I talk about misappropriation. Misappropriation isn't recognizing that somebody's doing something a certain way and it's a better way than what you're doing, so I'm going to follow that. I'm going to pick up that idea. That's not stealing something from somebody because you're not taking it away. Well, I take it back. Sometimes you have, but what I'm suggesting is let's learn from each other. If I see a better way of doing something, I don't care what color the person is or the community is or whatever else. I'm going to say we need to do that. And you know what? That has been our history. Native people we never existed as a monolith. We didn't have a one way of thinking, and we didn't have one way of thinking forever. You know what I'm saying? We evolved. We tried some of the same things that white people did back in Europe and other civilizations. We built big cities. Bad idea. Yeah, it's hard to maintain the all of the infrastructure. It's hard to make sure that you can maintain clean water and food supplies and fuel supplies, all that stuff. We made some of those same mistakes. You also see that while bringing many people together may come up with great ideas, you can also bring people together and come up with some bad habits. And some of those bad habits become part of the culture. The closer you are to nature, the more you're going to live according to nature's path and nature's flow. It's when mankind separates themselves in such a way that they think they are bigger and that they are supernatural. In fact, they even invent the concept supernatural with gods and goddesses, and and the way people think they understand spirituality, and so they prop themselves up above and beyond nature. That's never a good thing, and that's when you come up with the only thing supernatural about man is his ability to destroy nuclear weapons. Agents or weapons of mass destruction. Those are supernatural because nature would never have those things created for destruction. Look, I understand hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanoes, they are natural occurrences and they can be pretty destructive. But they also, are a part of a certain level of rebirth as well. There's no upside to mass murder and weapons of mass destruction. That is the singular place that man can hold himself, and I say himself because it's mostly men, above nature. And so we have to wait sometimes a long period of time for nature to make its correction. And when nature's wrath corrects the ills of man, it doesn't pick out who the real evildoers are, who the culprits are. It'll treat much of life the same. And in fact, we'll even take other forms of life with us as we go. So, look, and again, I'm not trying to make it sound like end of times or end of days or any of that stuff. We have a lot of control over how we live in the future. But the problem is, if we don't own what we've done wrong in the past, we will continue to do the same things. And I say that about Native people too. We have to own our future. And we have to stop thinking that we have been subjugated and relegated to some place within some American system, if you will. We better understand that we have a role. And in fact, the role that we play going forward, we may find ourselves more connected to other indigenous people, other native peoples around the globe, as we all understand where we have to go with the future. So that's kind of where I see, even as we close out this terrible year. Because look, to be clear, it's not just terrible because of inconvenience. We've lost loved ones. We've lost family members. And I know we lose them every year. But something different happened this year. And, it made us rethink how we live our lives. It's made us rethink, what it means to be social. So as we close out this last month of 2020, I hope we reflect a little bit, and I hope we make a commitment in the new year to do some things that perhaps we haven't taken on yet. And among those things is going to be continue to educate ourselves, understand, own the history, understand the history. The saying goes that those who don't acknowledge or remember history are destined to repeat it. Well, let's not keep making the same mistakes over and over again. If you want to wipe out all the mistakes and pretend they never happened, then you can arguably say, well, I didn't repeat the same mistake. I didn't know we did this before. Well, the fact is, there's been a lot of terrible things that mankind has done to themselves and to each other that we should learn from and not continue. So I want to thank you guys for joining me again. We will be back next time for another edition. So in the meantime, you take care of yourselves, and thanks for listening. Yahweh and Ona.
There's a heavy weight you've been trying to hold on to, but you can lay it all